All right, it's good to be back from my family trip to Ireland. We were spoiled rotten over in the Emerald Isle because my first generation Irish sister-in-law, Peggy, has so many first cousins over there in different parts of Ireland, mostly in County Galway. She and my brother, NJ, they go back frequently to visit, but this is the first time that the rest of the family has gone with them. And so I can see why they usually go back each year, as we had a wonderful time together. We were received by the Clerkins of Carlow, and then the trainers of Ballygar, and then the Ryans of Moyloch, and then the Sweeneys of Connemara. And we would usually celebrate Mass together at each of these places. So I didn't celebrate my daily Mass in a church but once. And that was actually in the ruins of a church built 1,000 years ago in the 11th century. And having spent a lot of time in this trip on a dairy farm, I have just even greater amount of respect for farmers, because we got to see all the hard work that goes into running a farm. And it was just a great time in general, bantering with Peggy's relatives and enjoying their Irish accents and beholding such a beautiful land. And even more delightful, though, was coming home on Friday on such a historic day, hearing the great news that Roe versus Wade was overturned that morning. This is such a historical moment in which we're living. This is paramount to the overturning of the Dred Scott decision with the 13th and 14th Amendment to the Constitution and the 19th Amendment of women's suffrage that recognized the equality of women. What happened on June 24th, 2022 with the overturning of the unjust ruling of Roe versus Wade was our human rights issue of our time, right? Is so, because the work is just beginning. All of these are instances, or all of these are recognizing, it's all about recognizing the full humanity of all our brothers and sisters of the human family. Whatever our color, our skin, whatever sex we may be, whatever disability we may have, whatever age we may be, we are all sons and daughters of God, made in his image. And this legal recognition that opens the possibility of each state in the Union now to prohibit the killing of an entire class of human beings. It's a giant step forward towards that vision of valuing every human life. At the same time, we have to remember that laws do not change hearts and minds. Laws don't change hearts and minds. In many ways, the work is just beginning. Remember how the Emancipation Proclamation of September 22, 1862, that freed enslaved people living in the Confederacy, that didn't end racism, did it? In fact, the Civil War that would take the lives of so many Americans heated up instead of being toned down, and would go on until April of 1865. But it was worth advancing the fight for the equality of our black brothers and sisters, right? And finally, Congress passed the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery in the United States. As we know, that did not end racism, but the abolition of slavery was the right thing to do, right? And as we know, that didn't even end slavery. Just because you outlaw something, it doesn't mean it ends. Like this very day, through the hidden slavery of sex trafficking and human trafficking, we have many, many people enslaved today, being forced to do unspeakable things. But just because it didn't stop slavery doesn't mean we shouldn't abolish slavery legally. Right? That legal recognition would not immediately end the subjugation of a whole class of people just because of the color of their skin. Right? The KKK, who also hated Catholics, by the way, not only colored peoples, so I'm like 2 strikes against them, right? So the KKK would rise up after the legal recognition of the full dignity of our colored brothers and sisters. Right? The 19th Amendment that granted women the right to vote was ratified on August 18, 1920. That was the right thing to do. But that did not in itself change hearts and minds and eradicate misogyny, did it? And so just because a certain human injustice has been abolished, it doesn't mean hearts and minds have changed. That takes time. As we know, there is still racism today. But as we know, all such legal and legislative measures did help advance the plight of colored people and were pivotal in changing the mentality of the citizenry. And it's ultimately really the gospel and God's grace that will ultimately change hearts and minds, to recognize the dignity of every human being. This is why this is why evangelization is so crucial. That's what's going to change hearts and minds, right? To recognize the inherent and inviolable dignity that is not based on, that each of us have, that is not based on the judgment of any human person, right? We've seen the tragedies throughout human history when we determine the value of something based on the judgment of another set of human beings. We have everything from the Holocaust to what happened in Russia to what's happening in Russia, right, in Ukraine. And so we have this inviolable dignity that is ours, not because of any human being telling us we're valuable, but because of our existence and being made in the image of God himself. And so we know what happened just 2 days ago on the historic day of June 24, 2022. That overturning of Roe versus Wade will not immediately change hearts and minds of our fellow citizens. But it was the right thing to do. And it was a major step forward in recognizing the full humanity of our preborn brothers and sisters. And so I'd like to share with you what Bishop Boyer stated on that day. He said, today's Supreme Court decision ends a dark chapter in our nation's history and opens the possibility of establishing a new civilization of love that cherishes life in the womb and calls on all of us to support all expectant mothers. And Bishop Boyer joined the other Michigan bishops of our state's 7 dioceses in issuing a joint statement, and so I'd like to share the majority of that with you. He said, nearly 50 years after the unjust decision in Roe versus Wade, our country draws closer to a society that recognizes the God-given right of all persons at any stage or in any condition. While today's ruling in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization that overturns Roe is a cause for joy, we must remember that life is and always will be a gift from our Creator. It cannot be given or taken by governmental structures, judges, or elected officials. No woman should face pregnancy alone. With safe delivery laws, adoption, pregnancy resource centers, and assistance from Catholic and other agencies that provide necessities for mom and baby, every pregnant woman should know there is a community of compassion and support waiting to help her and her unborn or infant child. And it's here I want to pause from the bishop's statement to recognize the little recognized and unheralded work for many years now of our pro-life pregnancy centers, both locally and throughout the country, that offer care and free resources as opposed to abortion centers that profit off of them and add to their victimization with the trauma of losing their child. So here in Jackson, that includes Birthline Pregnancy and the Birthline Pregnancy and Parenting Center on Porter Street, and then also the Center for Women on Lansing Ave. I also personally support one of the ones in Ann Arbor called Arbor Women. And these places and places throughout the country have staff and medical professionals as well who are simply desirous to help women and children in their struggles before and after their pregnancy. I also want to recognize the incredible work all these years in our community of our Jackson Right to Life and the 40 Days for Life movement that our very own parishioner Beth Torres has led so many times. These organizations will need our continued support as they freely provide the support that mothers and children need, which leads back to the statement of the Michigan bishops. They continue, the pro-life movement must redouble its efforts to ensure every woman has the support she needs throughout her pregnancy and beyond. Whether she chooses to parent or create an adoption plan, we affirm that the church must prioritize this work through our Catholic charities and parish-based support networks to meet the physical needs of mothers and children, as well as offer the emotional support and love new mothers need. We also implore men to be responsible when they father a child. We are all called to walk with moms in need, and we encourage all Michiganders to join us in this effort. Today's momentous decision would not have occurred without 50 years of prayer, action, and witness from innumerable women and men who promote the sanctity of human life. And I want to pause here again to thank everyone who has gone to a March for Life in DC or locally, taken part in 40 Days for Life, sidewalk counseled at Planned Parenthood, prayed for and offered assistance to mothers and their children in need, and taken part in any way in the pro-life movement. You have had a part in this significant moment in American history. As we know, however, what happened Friday is only the first step of the abolition of abortion, as the struggle is brought to each of the states. And so the statement of the Michigan bishops continue, we must remain vigilant against future attempts to promote abortion as help for women, which in reality are attacks on human life itself. Some of these attacks have already started here in Michigan through the legislative process, at the ballot box, and in the courtroom, signaling that the work to build up a social order that respects human life is not finished. So end of quote. You know, friends, as it was for the other civil rights movements of the past, it takes multiple measures in the various branches of government to move forward. And so we need to continue supporting leaders who will move that legal protection forward. But just as important, and even more so, we need to foster a culture of life and support for women and children who are in need. Many of you know that I came to Michigan chasing after a gal, right? My ex-girlfriend lived here in Michigan, and a year after I got ordained, she entered, ordained a priest, she entered the Sisters of Life. And the Sisters of Life are incredible in the work that they do. They not only foster a culture of life, but they help, they dedicate themselves to helping women in need who are expectant mothers and mothers already with born children, right? Because they have these homes where they live in, and next door would be the mothers trying to get their feet back on the ground after making a courageous decision, often against family support, and they've been abandoned. And a lot of these mothers who are in these situations, they don't know what unconditional love is. They've been so used and abused, traumatized, that left to themselves, they would despair because of the lack of support. And especially after a wound of having lost their child, right? But the Sisters of Life come in and they help women who have made that courageous decision to have their child, and they show them, even more than the material assistance they provide, they show them what unconditional love is. Maybe for the first time they've experienced that. And it's so healing to their hearts. It provides so much hope for them because it has renewed their sense of hope in themselves and hope in humanity to encounter such unconditional love. And I mention that story because the work of the church in this post-Roe time, as the bishops have encouraged, is for us as the body of Christ, is to ensure the support that mothers and children need. The community pro-life organizations can't do it on their own. They will all need all of us to have an eye for those God has placed in our life to be a source of spiritual and material support, so that they may tangibly know that unconditional love that perhaps they have never even known in their life. I know those Sisters of Life are celebrating mightily this weekend. I too celebrated with some friends. One of my best friends picked me up from the airport, and they had spontaneously gotten a few families together to celebrate. We had a champagne toast, and I have yet to have my first soda in 25 years. Just to give you the backstory on that, in the spring of 1997, I was like 24 years old at that time. But 25 years ago, I stopped taking soda, or rather pop, because I forgot that I'm a Michigander now, right? So, growing up in Missouri, if you've ever seen one of those maps that have multicolored maps that are different colors for different terms predominantly used in that area, well, so like Missouri is this anomaly in the Midwest. It's like the solid blue of an area surrounded by red, because soda meant that was the predominant word for that was used for soda pop, and pop was the rest of the Midwest. But anyway, I digress. I stopped taking soda 25 years ago, but now that it's the whole reason why I gave it up has come to fruition, I don't even have a desire for it anymore. So, but anyway, we celebrate today. We celebrate this weekend, knowing that the work of the body of Christ continues and we forge ahead. What will ultimately change hearts and minds is Jesus Christ, who remains the steadfast and faithful one, the same yesterday, today, and forever.